morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
We are here at the 79th Annual Automotive Recyclers Association here in Orlando, Florida. And this morning we have the pleasure of speaking with Howard. So good morning, Howard.
Good morning to both of you.
Good morning. And I will give you this moment now to just introduce yourself and give a little bit of your background so our viewers can understand, what your background is.
Okay. I'm the administrator of the National Salvage Vehicle Reporting Program. We're a law enforcement not-for-profit. We were established in 2008 at the request of the U.S. Department of Justice. We were established to help support the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System, which was being implemented under a court-ordered federal rule that DOJ had 60 days to implement. And we brought to the Department of Justice a standard for reporting for automobile recyclers and generally commerce in used and salvage vehicles. Our standard was incorporated in the federal rule, and we were cited in the federal rule and applauded for the work that we did, and DOJ directed the operator of Navitas to follow our rule, so we're actually part of the federal rule.
Wow, that's very important work. Howard, how do you pronounce your last name again? It's
Nusbaum.
Nusbaum.
Yes.
I'm sorry, because I wasn't quite sure about that. I didn't want to mess
There
that
is
up.
a wide variety of pronunciations for it. So in addition to doing that, we have been asked at various times to develop standards for other government agencies. We were asked to develop a standard for automobile safety recalls by NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. That standard has then been used by about 16 of the car manufacturers for their reporting on safety recalls on Takata airbags to NHTSA. For a number of them, we also monitor their activity on the vehicles and provide a status report that they turn in when they do their quarterly reporting to the government. We do other work that is involved with tracking commerce in vehicles. We have supported and identified in the past large-scale terror financing. And those types of activities we don't generally discuss, and we don't post anything much about it, but there is that element that we handle also.
Yeah, I recall you and I had a brief conversation along those lines, and I was pretty surprised to hear some of that work that had been going on behind the scenes. Very important work.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, the reason we've got you on here today is because we have an issue in the automotive recycling industry, which we're all kind of having to deal with on different levels. It has to do with the catalytic converter theft. And I was curious, you've published a white paper on this topic, and so you certainly have a perspective on how the industry might approach handling maybe reporting, or maybe your thoughts. There's so many different ways that this is approached. I know my wife came to me the other day during the week, just before we flew out here, and she says, "Oh, look," because we live in Temecula, California. She says, "Oh, look, the Temecula Police Department is having a drive for people to bring their cars and put VIN numbers on their catalytic converters to prevent theft." So I thought maybe we could, ask you what your thoughts are on that. Or
We're actually very heavily involved in multiple aspects of the catalytic converter theft problem. The white paper that you're alluding to was our first effort to lay out what was actually going on with the problem. Mm-hmm. Our board, which I neglected to mention, is we're a law enforcement not-for-profit, but our board is made up solely of local, state, and federal agency representatives. Many of them are directly involved in the leading edge of trying to deal with the catalytic converter theft problem. So the white paper that we developed was outlining first why the problem was taking place, which I'll be very happy to go into our perspective on it.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
And we'll do that. And what can be done about it. And we've actually been working on supporting and implementing different initiatives to deal with aspects of, first, legislatively, things to be done to correct deficiencies in local, state, and federal laws. Second is methods of helping to reduce the theft rate of converters. That's mainly targeted to different industries that are particularly subject to the threat. And we're also working on efforts to set up controlled databases to be able to identify parties who may be actively involved in the problem, because ultimately catalytic converters would not be stolen if the people who steal them couldn't then sell them up the chain.
Right.
If there's no money, then there would be no theft. So the ultimately, you have to hit all of these problems, and they all take different approaches to do so.
Multiple ways. Do you think that the numbering of converters, the VIN numbering of converters, is a deterrent? What are your thoughts?
So the answer is yes, no, and maybe.
Okay.
Other than that, it's perfect.
Right.
The
In other
answer-
words, give it a try, right?
Yeah. No, it's other than that. So for example, if the converters were marked by the manufacturer so that the VIN marking, when it was looked at, is very clearly the original VIN marking
Okay.
of the converter, and it is clearly, it was with the vehicle at that time, that would be helpful. That's essentially the federal marking process that works very well for other parts.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, two of the new target parts that will be very attractive for being stolen are not covered. And unlike some other federal laws, the actual statute enumerates which parts are required to be marked. And neither catalytic converters nor the upcoming problem with propulsion batteries, main batteries on EVs,
Right.
neither of those
Are covered.
covered by the federal law. So we've been pushing for a number of years to try to get those two parts added in an update to the federal statute.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
That could go a long ways
Yeah.
to help the problem.
So that's the yes.
Right.
The no is, if I were a catalytic converter thief, I would say I'll have a whole pile of catalytic converters. I'll mark VINs on them myself. I'll pick VINs that came from vehicles that are out of circulation, salvage cars and the like. And I would just have a bunch of people mark those catalytic converters with VINs, and if the police came by my place, it would look
Legitimate.
and in fact, by adding the VIN marking to the stolen catalytic converters, I'm actually enhancing the protection to my business of engaging in criminal activity.
of
So
course.
that's a no.
Right.
Yeah.
I can give you the maybe.
Give us the maybe.
I
Let's
like
hear
to
the
hear.
maybe.
I want to hear the different perspectives from your point of view.
Okay. So the maybe is there are some effective marking programs for anti-theft, but they're only going to be effective if they're done in a certain way. So for example, if you have a label that has a VIN on it, and you put that on the converter, and it's a label that if you peel it off, it still leaves a residual. It looks like you've done something to control the problem.
Right.
But for example, you could print up, 500 of the same label and then
Just
slap
reuse
them
it?
on the converter after you've stolen the converter.
Yeah.
It won't do anything.
Right.
Or you could put it on as an anti-theft device, but when the converter is brought up, there's no central police database, so there's no way to link it to, to a party to do anything. On the other hand, there are some very effective marking programs. We're actually involved in supporting one of them that is in use in New York PD, New York State DMV, state of Minnesota, Houston, and a variety of other places. It's a pre-numbered with pinholes, self-destructive label. The label is put on the converter. There's chemical that's smeared across it, which etches the number
Into it.
The label is pre-registered in a law enforcement database, and part of the process of registering it on the converter is that the owner's information is also recorded in that database. If the loose converter is looked at and scanned by the police, it goes to that database, and it will immediately be known that it was stolen, who it was stolen from, and that would work well. So some of those label programs are good, some of those label programs are not good.
Yeah. Because other states, they don't have that.
It's
database
a
currently,
voluntary
right?
federal program. So, for example, NYPD has a program, and there was a grant given. They've purchased the labels, and they have registration fairs where people will come in, bring their vehicles, and they can get it marked. The Minnesota Criminal Fraud Bureau is doing that in a large scale for the state of Minnesota. It's given out to the police departments, and it's a public service process. And there's several 100,000 of these labels out there now that are being applied, and the databases are being updated.
And there's millions of
interesting.
converters on the road.
There are millions of
millions.
converters on
Millions of converters on the road. So let me shift gears with you for a moment and ask you, as a recycler in the industry, what do you see that we could do?
Well, I'm not a recycler in this
Right.
way. I have been a recycler in the industry.
You have been, yes.
But I would say that there's a lot that you can do. I want to add one point to what I was saying.
Go ahead.
Which is the theft problem falls into two families, and you have to treat the two separately. So one family is street crime, and street crime is you have a drug addict. A drug addict is going to steal a small number of converters to finance their fix for a day or two.
Right.
And they'll sell those converters to what you'd call a fence. And a fence is somebody that doesn't use their own employees to do the theft. They're just opportunity, they advertise, and then they'll move the product into the stream of commerce. The second, which is actually even the much larger problem, is an organized crime ring. So if you have a car dealership and you come in one morning and 75 of your cars have had the converters removed from them, that's not a drug addict.
No.
A drug addict, just one and go, two
Right.
and go. But the ones that are the bigger problem are the organized crime rings. Now, it turns out that the labeling programs are very effective if they're a proper labeling program to help protect fleets or large parties from getting hit by organized crime groups, because an organized crime group knows that if they're hitting a place that has registered labels, that they're at risk if they're caught
Sure.
of immediately being shut down.
Right. It's more of a deterrent then.
It's a deterrent, and they're sophisticated enough to know that they don't want to hit that place, because if they do and they get caught, they're toast.
Yeah.
Now, when I asked you this question about recyclers, that's a real broad term. I mean, it could mean automotive recycler, it could mean a scrap metal recycling company, it could be a processor of catalytic converters, all the way up,
Absolutely,
all the way up the supply chain to the smelter and the wet chemistry operation.
Absolutely. So we've in the white paper we've described that whole pyramid, and we view the problem and the solution in those terms. So what I just said about the organized crime ring relates to what is it that you're actually trying to protect, and what can you not protect, and then how does that relate to the whole processing stream. So ultimately, the top of the pyramid, which is the refiner.
The refiner, the wet chemistry operation that
Right.
separates the precious metals.
Ironically, the whole problem, they can't control it, but it's the money coming from there that works its way down. And clearly, they have to buy the material, and they're nowhere down near what's taking place in the weeds.
They're too far removed.
Too far removed, there's no question about that. But the irony is, the money at the top
Is bank money.
is the banking money that
Yeah.
funds ultimately the problem at the bottom. That of course doesn't mean they're at fault, they're responsible, or anything else. But if you follow the money down, and then you say, oh, this person provided X amount of converters that was paid for, and you can trace the money down, and then you say, okay, here's a person who generated 30,000 converters in a year, and then you say, who is this person? Oh, this person is a large recycling corporation that documents the purchase of 20,000 vehicles a year that they report to the Department of Justice as the vehicles they've purchased. That's clean.
For dismantling purposes.
For dismantling purposes.
Right.
That's a legitimate understanding of why
30,000 converters in the supply
30,000
chain.
converters
Yeah.
generated. But you need to check by following the money down. Then, as an example, there's a muffler shop. It's a muffler shop in name. It used to be a muffler shop. Person bought a facility, no equipment in it. LLC in St. Louis, 15,000 converters with no business.
Oh, so that's just a shell then,
That's
obviously.
a shell.
Yeah.
And if you work your way down, now you say, oh, how did this person
How do you do that with two
generate all
employees?
those
How do you
converters?
accumulate that with no machinery,
It's
no
a miracle.
employees? Right.
So the answer is, they were asked, how does this happen? And the answer was, oh, these were the owners of the vehicles who had replaced their converters, and they brought it in. And I have this paper, Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse. No,
Oh, that's who signed for it. Those were the owners.
those
that
were the owners. And by the way, it's amazing how many repeat cars those people had, because when the site was surveilled, the same drug addicts were coming in every day or two, all to feed that.
Right.
Now, you wouldn't know this person unless either local police was aware that there was a problem and they kind of tracked what was going on, or you could trace it down.
They've stolen merchandise crosses state lines all the time.
Right. Now, the problem was, under Missouri state law, the laws are so bad that any business-to-business transaction where the business had a reason to be in possession of catalytic converters. A fake muffler shop would have a reason to have catalytic converters.
Legitimate reason.
Right.
In
Under the
theory,
law.
Yeah.
But not in that volume.
Right.
And not when you're not operating a business.
Right.
But according to the law, that was covered by the law. And the law said business-to-business transactions are exempted from reporting, and you can pay in cash. And that was the law set up in Missouri. So it turns out that even if you caught the person, you couldn't prove what car it was taken off of because they're not marked, and I'll go into that problem. And you couldn't prosecute under state law.
Wow.
So the only way this prosecution took place was under federal law because they have a different set of laws that they can work on. So in order to solve the problem, I'm going to jump to another set of the fundamentals that relate to the problem,
Okay.
and then try to pull all of this together. So first of all, why are catalytic converters stolen? Because they're valuable. Why are they valuable? Normally just for the PGMs, right?
Right.
Platinum group metals. They should also be valuable, and they are in some cases, for use in repairs.
Sure.
But not as much as they should be.
Very small
Yeah.
amount.
Small amount. That's going to increase because it turns out that the common misinformation in the United States was the EPA does not allow for the reuse of catalytic converters for repairs. It turns out that that's totally untrue. They have had certification programs and policy saying that if you retest catalytic converters, and there's a reporting process to report into the EPA, that with the exception of California, New York, Colorado, and Massachusetts, and Maine, all of whom follow CARB, which is the California Air Resources Board, that the EPA program is perfectly fine. We're actually now acting as a regulator for that program to make sure that only parties that are clean are able to provide converters for the testing lab, that the cars themselves are not stolen, the cars themselves are owned by the party who's providing it to the lab, that they've reported it to DOJ as their vehicles, and we're trying to educate insurance companies, rental car fleets, that this is available because they're getting killed when a converter's stolen. Not only are they that expensive, they're not available for 6, 8, 12 weeks, and
Right.
it's just awful.
Yeah.
So that's almost a side issue, but that false narrative has allowed certain groups to then go to state legislatures saying, well, there's no legitimate use for these things. We should be the only ones to have them. And that's helped flow the problem in. So the basic problem is they're worth a lot.
Right.
They're not marked. You can't tie them to a known theft. There's no central database for theft of converters for you to even check. And once you decan them, which is part of the process you have to go through for the remanufacturing, you can't do anything.
Right.
So you put all of that together. and
Perfect storm, right?
You got a
Yeah.
perfect storm. And to make it worse, the laws that have been put in place have exacerbated the problem. They're now thankfully starting to get changed through education. But they said business-to-business transactions are exempted from reporting. Payments up to $300 in some cases can be done in cash. Well, if you allow cash payments, guess what?
It's not
if it's
traceable.
300, 3,000,
How do you
or
trace it?
20,000, you don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's been awful, and the volume of theft is vastly higher than people understood. And if you want to ask me, I can give you a good handle on that.
I was
now.
going to ask you that. Yeah, because I think a lot of it is suppressed. A lot of it's probably not reported. But what is a true number?
So
Now, where would you get that data from?
Yeah.
Right. So I noted originally one of the podcasts here, somebody said 20,000 for a year. I also noted that I saw a whole series of numbers, they're all contradictory and all wildly low.
They're all over the place.
All over the, well, not all over the place, all over the place but low.
Yeah.
I see.
Let's nowhere in magnitude to what it really is. So I'm going to give you two different ways to come up with a realistic number, but I want to explain that the reason there was no good number is because there's no central reporting, there's no good statistics if you try to look here and there. So for example, the insurance industry pays for certain types of catalytic converter theft. So the types of catalytic converter theft they pay for is going to be the property casualty insurance companies for private individuals who have been hit and who file a claim.
Right.
Okay? Unfortunately, most of the insurance companies, when they pay the claims, do not even have a category for separately coding and reporting internally
Wow.
those claims. 2 years ago, State Farm pretty much became the first insurance company that when there was a catalytic converter claim filed, they code catalytic converter claims as a specific category
That's
so they
important
collect the
information.
information.
Right.
As far as I know, they're the only one doing it. Some more are starting now.
That's interesting.
Okay, number one. Number two, people who get hit who are fleets or people who are hit who are dealerships, they don't use State Farm, those type of insurance, and many of them don't even report. It's just general business theft. And that's not coded. So I'm going to give you numbers that we know. State Farm reported this first 6 months of this year, 23,700 or some number like that, claims that were filed with them. Not everybody who's a State Farm customer who's had a catalytic converter stolen has filed a claim, because some of them will say, all right, I'll get $2,000. I have to have the deductible.
Right.
I may have my premiums go up.
Right.
Not everybody, but let's make believe for a minute that everybody had filed the claim. So I'm starting out conservative. If you double the number, because that was only 6 months, January 1 to June 30th, the number came out to be about 47,000 claims just for State Farm.
Wow.
Okay? We know one other number. It's a hard number, just like that is a hard number, not a speculative number. State Farm, as of last year, represented 15.98% of the property casualty market. Now I'm going to make one layer of assumption that the State Farm customers are no different than the customers who have USAA, Geico, Allstate, or anybody else. I think that is a highly safe assumption to make.
Yeah.
There's nothing different about them at all. It's not that State Farm is in a more urban area where there's going to be more theft. They're not. So if you take 47,000 thefts and make believe that that's the totality of the thefts for all State Farm customers, and you say that's only 15.98% of the property casualty market, that's 295,000 thefts in
Across
a year.
the whole insurance industry.
Across the whole insurance industry for the
6 months, right?
No,
that's
for the
for
year.
a year.
Oh,
For the
okay.
year.
But keep in mind, that's only for the cars covered
With that insurance.
by property casualty insurance.
Right.
Now, I want to point out, the average age of a car on a road is reliably
What was that number
over
again?
11.5 5 years.
I mean, the total number of converters over the whole insurance industry.
295,000. And that
bears worth repeating there.
Yeah.
Right. Now, that is a very conservative number for the population covered by property casualty insurers. So I'm not stretching,
Right.
I'm low.
Okay.
Okay? Now, it turns out that the average age of a car on the road is 11 and a half years, could be 12 by now. And people with 11 and a half year old cars do not carry collision comprehensive
No,
insurance.
they have
They have
liability
liability
only.
insurance.
Correct.
Now, there are...
I'm paying too much in premiums then.
And the reason is, if there's a claim, first, there's a deductible.
Right.
Second, there's a premium increase.
Of course.
And the premium's high anyway.
Right.
So it turns out, and we've done a lot of research on this because we work on safety recalls and we track over 300,000 transactions a day on vehicle traffic throughout the United States. We're one of the largest repositories of that information. The property casualty insurance market is less than 45% of all of the vehicles. On new cars that have not yet been sold to the public, they're not covered under property casualty insurance. That's under general policy that the dealerships have. The car manufacturers use companies like Tokyo Marine Insurance, none of which has to do with StateFarm, Allstate, or any other.
Right.
So the minimum possible number derived from the number that's a very solid conservative number for property casualty puts you at least at about 650,000 to 750,000 thefts a year. And that's one way to look at it. Another way to come at the same numbers are just look at some of the recent busts that have taken place through law enforcement efforts. There was one that was just done on the West Coast out of Oregon that on an annualized basis was about 80,000 converters, one criminal enterprise.
Jeez.
Houston had one that was about 20,000. There was another one in central Ohio, about 20,000. And that one I mentioned in St. Louis was about 18,000. In a year, it's over 100,000
Right.
just from 4 entities
Right.
alone, which also dovetails with the same thing. So we are looking at that, and we are looking at ways of helping to cut down on the large-scale theft. We're not going to be able to impact in any material way a drug addict stealing 1 converter or 2 converters here. But if there's a party that then is collecting and consolidating, because they're not stealing if they're not being paid.
Right.
So the one thing you want to do is start to see who's generating converters, and that's going to involve, ironically, industries such as yourselves, the smelters, and I know you have very strong anti-money laundering requirements, but we're setting up a system for reporting that will be confidential, and we're a quasi-government entity, and we will be able to consolidate, not caring about at a VIN level because we know that the VINs will be removed and there's no way to trace back, but if we can see who the purchasing is being made from, and I don't know if you've heard the term smurfing. You deal in anti-money laundering, so I'm sure you do. So if I was a criminal enterprise and I wanted to try to keep my head low, I may cut up and sell different portions of my material to multiple parties, and you individually would not recognize what I'm generating. But if I can consolidate it because multiple people are reporting, and I can say, wait a minute, Harry's Muffler Shop, 500, through your company, 800 through this one, 700 through this one, what the heck's going on here? Then that can be looked at. And these are ways of trying to identify the places where those detached converters are leaking in, either from a fencing operation or a direct criminal enterprise.
Sounds like some tools that would be very useful.
Yeah.
It will. We've done this in the past with commerce in used vehicles, funding terrorism, going over to West Africa, and we identified 39 parties that between them had shipped 365,000 vehicles to West Africa, about $3.75 billion, mostly going to fund Hezbollah.
Wow.
And that was in 2013. Same general concept of we had all the shipping records, and we were able to then take the names and identify when there were bunches of them, and we saw they were using aliases and the like, and consolidate it all together. We're not going to catch the little players,
Right.
but the little players are not the big problem.
It is a
Yeah,
big
that makes
problem.
sense.
Yeah, it's an epidemic in this industry. Most of us don't see the overall. We see what our slice is
Yeah.
and what we have to deal with.
You're getting hurt, by the way. That 750,000 converters are not going to you when they should. I mean, some may and you don't know it, but they're not going where they ought to go.
Right.
And there's one other statistic that's very interesting. Everybody throws out numbers as to what the cost is of a catalytic converter theft. Would you like to know what
Sure.
the cost is of
Yeah.
a catalytic converter theft?
That'd be good.
Okay, so the StateFarm number was they paid out $50 million in the first 6 months of 2022 on 23,700 claims. This was the payout on the repair, right? We're not talking about the rental car cost,
Just strictly the
just
repair.
the repair. That turns out, when I did the math, it averaged $2,100 per converter. However, that's what State Farm paid. There's a deductible. There's another $500.
On top of it.
On top of that, that was paid by the
Consumer.
insured directly.
The client.
Client. So it's about $2,600 on the average. That's the best number that I can give you. There clearly are some that are 2 and 3 times that, but
So if
That's
you
average.
take,
that's the average.
That's
so
the
you're
average.
saying about 700,000 converters a year times that number.
It's about $1.5 billion.
It's a big number.
Wow.
It's an amazing number.
Wow.
And those are solid numbers.
Yeah, a lot bigger than that
Well,
gets
a
reported,
lot bigger
you
than,
know?
like I say, many of us, we have our slice of the industry, we have our myopic view of what we have to deal with. We get visited by local law enforcement, we have conversations with them. I've had conversations with local law enforcement that have told me, we don't really consider it to be a big problem.
Yeah.
Really?
Right.
There's no category for the theft. So if you're looking at the stats, there's nothing. And when police comes to somebody's house, my converter was stolen, they can't do anything.
Yeah.
What are they taking down? It's an unmarked piece of property,
Right.
okay, that's gone, okay? They're dealing with a lot bigger problems, and they're not
Right.
going to spend
Yeah.
a whole bunch of time writing
And not
it
to
up.
mention the fact that we've got, these petty theft, limits.
In California.
Well, we have $950, I think it is.
You
limit.
can't document what it is anyway.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, It's just such a large scale problem, and it seems to me, from what you're describing, that the only way to really get a handle on it is a top down approach.
Well, I see it as a multifaceted problem. A top-down approach ultimately will contain, that's all it will do, and catch a large number of the bigger players. Won't catch all of them, because part of the problem is, if you keep it down to just a certain level, there are parties that are in the commerce that will still flow into their
supply, yeah.
operation. So, but the egregious ones, you have a good chance of catching. But there's a multifaceted approach. One is you want to protect yourself if you can. So if you're a fleet operator, you're a rental car company, you do this type of marking, you publicize that on your perimeter that these are all protected. You have labels on the windows. You're going to have an organized group more likely hit somebody else. That's one thing you want to do. The second thing you want to do is if you are hit, and this is especially for when the vehicles are on the outside, not on a perimeter, either because your private party or your rental car company got hit while it was out on rental, you want to try to reduce the cost of a repair. That's a totally separate issue, and that's something that we're also trying to help with at the same time by making the EPA compliant converters, which by the way are also pre-labeled with anti-theft labels, to be more readily accessible, because that cuts the cost of the repair. It doesn't wipe it out, but the part component, not the labor component, labor is going to be the same for the repair, it might take it down by 40 or 50%, which is still a good thing.
Yeah.
And you have to put all of those things together. Now, 10 years from now, the catalytic converter problem will abate for the most part by itself, simply because there won't be internal combustion engine cars. And as they work their way through, but that's not going to be a solution for 15 years, 20 years.
Right.
So, it doesn't help now.
It doesn't help now.
No.
So you have more information available on your website, I take it.
Thank you. Yes. So the website is nsvrp.org, and we have a lot of public-facing information there. We have other information that is not public-facing, obviously, because of some of the things we do. And we recently also started to use LinkedIn, ironically.
Yeah.
Because we were able to push out invitations and that information, and we have a very broad exposure with most of the federal agencies, and at the upper levels of those organizations, they've all been looking at and have access to this information, which is also, I think, helpful in trying to set federal policy.
It's very important.
That's great.
Well, I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us today these important facts that you guys have been working on behind the scenes and now coming out with them into the industry. I see these potential tools also as being a big benefit going forward. We'll see where it takes us.
Right, and I want to compliment your company and what you do, because this is all very helpful towards coming up with a solution and getting it in place. And I know that you're a big supporter of trying to clean these things up.
Well, it really takes a community effort.
And you're doing a very good job helping that along.
Yeah, it takes a community effort, and
Definitely.
we have quite a few larger companies that are part of our trade organizations that we are members in. We have an alignment of interest of trying to get a handle on this and doing what is necessary and what's correct. So this is good stuff. It's exciting. Again, I want to thank you for coming on today, Howard Nusbaum. Hopefully I pronounced your name
Yes.
correctly.
Yes.
Thank you, Howard, for
My
enlightening
pleasure,
us and our
and thank
viewers.
you.
Thank you very much.
you.